webinar on the initiatives which CUTRIC, the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium, is working on. As I said earlier, my name is Rajiv Roy, and I'll be your host for today. I'm the chair of ITS Canada Technical Committee for Public Transit, also known as Advanced Public Transit Systems Committee. I would like to thank ITS Canada for arranging this webinar and providing the necessary resources for it. The CUTRIC was created in 2014 with the financial support from the not-for-profit organization Canadian Urban Transit Association, also known as CUTA. CUTRIC's objective is to support industry and academic collaborations in the development of the next generation of technologies for Canadian transit and transportation systems. The webinar will discuss and review the following: structure and mandate of CUTRIC, initiatives they are currently working on, and their attempt to bid for additional funding. I would like to thank Josipa for taking time off her busy schedule and agree to present at this webinar. Josipa is the Executive Director and CEO of CUTRIC. Josipa completed her PhD in History of Mathematics at the University of Edinburgh as a Commonwealth Scholar, after completing Masters of Science in Science and Technology, also as a Commonwealth Scholar. She previously completed a Masters of Science in Political Philosophy at the London School of Economics and Political Science, and a bachelor's degree in Political Science and Journalism at the Carleton University. Some housekeeping items before we start our webinar, and I hand it over to Josipa for the presentation. The webinar will be recorded, and a link to Windows Media file will be sent to all registrants. We have allocated about 45 minutes for the presentation, and Josipa will take the questions at the end. You can send your questions through the text box or raise hand provided to you on the webinar toolbar. As a courtesy towards other attendees and presenters, please mute your line unless you need to ask a question. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Josipa for the presentation.
Very good. Thank you very much, Rajiv, and thank you to ITS Canada for giving me the opportunity and providing CUTRIC with the opportunity to present to your community. What you're going to see in front of you pop up in a moment is a presentation, and we're happy to share this presentation after the fact. Okay, so what we're going to do here is just make sure that it's in full screen mode. Okay, and Rajiv, I'm just going to double check that on your end you're able to see the first screen.
Absolutely.
Okay, very good. So with that, what I'm going to do then is take you through a high-level introduction to CUTRIC, but embedded within what is the current ongoing dialogue around supercluster funding. And so within that dialogue, we're more than happy to share questions and feedback about the Supercluster initiative itself, because it is helping us to lead the overall bid process. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium, as well as the Low Carbon Smart Mobility Supercluster Consortium within our initiative federally, and then I'll take you through some of our key marquee projects. For some of you, I know within the ITS community, you are probably quite well aware of the Supercluster funding at a federal level. If you've been involved in CUTRIC projects, some of this may be a repeat for you, but I'm going to assume that everybody is not on the same page, so I'm going to introduce you to the Supercluster funding, which is guiding a lot of our project development right now. For those of you who are familiar with Supercluster, it's a federal funding program from ISED. It's essentially meant to create a bunch of one-stop shops for Canada's innovators in key areas. The reason that we're interested in Supercluster funding is largely because we've been lobbying the federal government for about 2 years now to obtain streamlined federal funding for advanced low-carbon smart mobility technology innovation. Everything from the vehicle powertrain development through to the vehicle-to-grid integration and vehicle-to-infrastructure integration, out through the deployment and fleet-based analyses. And really, up until this year, there hasn't been a streamlined federal funding program. There's been lots of fragmented federal funding programs, which has made it really difficult to launch commercially valuable, globally relevant projects in this country. So Supercluster funding gives us the opportunity to finally streamline what has been a very fragmented federal landscape. Now, the bullet point that we're interested in is bullet point number 3 primarily. For those of you familiar with Supercluster, you'll know that $800 million was drawn from budget 2016 for this initiative, of which 4 superclusters will be funded likely. But additionally, in this year's budget, the amount was increased to $950 million, and that extra $150 million was tethered to a transportation innovation supercluster, of which the money was also tethered from the public transit and green infrastructure allocations from Infrastructure Canada. And the reason that's important is because if you're familiar with Infrastructure Canada's money, you'll know that public transit and green infrastructure allocations come with a particular mandate to advance low-carbon smart mobility technologies, inclusive of transit fleet applications. So we were really happy to see this announcement and this tethering of funds to some extent, at least philosophically, to the Infrastructure Canada mandate for green transit and green infrastructure, because of course that is what CUTRIC has been building up over the last 3 years as we've brought in rail applications and automotive applications for multimodal shared mobility initiatives. So I'm going to just quickly review some of the key characteristics of a supercluster, the strong connections with different actors, so OEM, suppliers, startups, transit fleets, and other fleets. Improved quality of life, that goes without saying when we're talking about low-carbon smart mobility for Canadians. Diversified skilled and talent pools, so I'm going to take you through our academic members. Our opportunities to grow, this is especially targeting SMEs and startups in this country that need to integrate into Tier 1 suppliers and OEMs, and then risk sharing. So the whole idea here is that the federal taxpayer, the provincial taxpayer, sometimes the municipal taxpayer, and of course the industry investor are sharing the risk associated with what can sometimes be high-cost, high-risk projects for commercial development. And CUTRIC has developed itself based on these clusters, or these characteristics rather, over the last 3 years. So the fact that these characteristics are defining and core to the modus operandum of the supercluster actually works really well in our favor. Now, in terms of the vision here that I'll present to you is really the CUTRIC vision that has guided the CUTRIC organization for the last 3 years, but it's sort of a CUTRIC vision on steroids. Essentially, we're looking at making Canada a global leader in low-carbon smart mobility tech, incorporating light-duty and heavy-duty platforms. Many of you know that we do make electrified vehicles, but they're heavy-duty platforms in this country, so very important to integrate both the light-duty and the heavy-duty manufacturing sectors, inclusive of transit, transportation, and integrated mobility applications. So here we have transit fleets as test beds, we have fleets of vehicles for private operators as test beds, and then we have general transportation applications inclusive of rail. In terms of the mission of the organization, the real focus is on commercialization trials. But within the commercialization trials that we've been looking at, large-scale deployment trials for optimization, integration, refinement, and grid management, for example, there's a lot of relevant research and development that has to happen. So this is where the National Research Council, the CanMet labs come into play, as well as universities and colleges. And I know there's been a lot of fear that universities would be cut out of supercluster funding, because it is industry-led and the projects are meant to be industry-oriented, and it is entirely feasible, possible, and likely that there will be B2B projects that don't include any university in many cases. But there are several projects that will include universities because of the unique equipment, laboratory skills, and capacities that are frequently required for some of these large-scale commercialization projects, especially on an analysis, modeling, simulation, and assessment process. So we know that RD&D is going to be incorporated, and universities will have the opportunity to grow their capacities as a result of that. In terms of the supercluster and CUTRIC domestic and global strategies, the strategies are threefold. One is to develop and apply next-gen mobility technologies within and across Canada. And what that means is we have companies like Thales Canada or Ballard Power Systems that typically are developing technologies that they're exporting out of the country, and they're developing them in Canada and struggling to get them integrated into Canadian fleets. So the exportation of IP is important for economic growth, but of course the integration into Canadian fleets is an opportunity not only for commercialization but for the advancement of Canadian mobility systems. So we focus both on development and application, which is why transit fleets and fleet owners are part of the consortium from day one. The second domestic and global strategy is to grow the low-carbon smart mobility technology ecosystem in the country. So that's quite important, and unfortunately we do have the clean screen there, but it looks like some pop-ups are still coming there, so hopefully you're able to ignore those pop-ups as they come up. But in any case, the second strategy is to grow the low-carbon smart mobility technology ecosystem in the country to create economic growth, and then the third is really to export IP know-how to the global marketplace. So none of that too surprising, I think, for folks on the line. Now, I want to take you through the pillars of innovation that we're working in. Our pillars of innovation, looks like it just went forward one. Our pillars of innovation are fivefold. There are 5 pillars of innovation involved in the CUTRIC Consortium, which we have focused on and grown over the last 2 to 3 years, which are now defining the supercluster bid. So the first pillar is, of course, low carbon and zero emissions propulsion systems with charging system and fueling system integration. So this means any project in battery electric, plug-in hybrid electric, hydrogen fuel cell electric, compressed and renewable natural gas, and dimethyl ether for truck applications. These are projects where, for example, I'll take you through our Pan-Canadian electric bus project. It's the application of the technology on the powertrain, sometimes the integration of the powertrain into a vehicle, sometimes the integration of that vehicle into an actual on-road demonstration trial. So we have projects, let's say, from TM4 on the powertrain side for electric motors, and then we have projects with Brampton Transit and TransLink for the actual integration of electric buses. And of course, they vary in size. Now, in terms of the supercluster, what we've been doing is getting our anchor companies to actually make pledges and commitments for how much money out of the federal funding pot do they want to be able to do innovation projects within Canada over the next 5 years. So far, we're up around the $45 million mark for this particular pledge. That means companies in Canada or companies wanting to do work in Canada have said they will invest at least $45 million into the Canadian economy in this space in the next 5 years, for which they are asking the federal government to match it dollar for dollar to create larger project budgets. This amount will increase. We know as of yesterday that this amount will likely increase now to about $80 million. So this pillar is going to be a very large initiative nationally. It is mostly located in terms of the companies making the commitments in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia, primarily Ontario and Quebec. Pillar number 2 is smart vehicles and smart infrastructure. Here, these are projects in automated, autonomous, and connected vehicle systems, sensors, signaling, controlling systems on road and on rail, a lot of convergent technology that's coming out of the rail sector being applied in the future into automotive or into dedicated bus lane systems. So here we have several key companies coming forward. One of the biggest ones is Thales Canada that is contributing into the supercluster at over $20 million. So we're really excited about that, growing this footprint in Canada through the supercluster initiative. We have a series of several projects coming in through large companies, mid-sized companies in big data and data analytics. I expect that this particular pillar will grow between stage 1 and stage 2 of the supercluster. Stage 1 is due on July 21st, which many of you are familiar with. Stage 2, if we are invited back to the table on the short list, is due in October of this year. Between July and October, we'll be looking to companies like IBM to determine if they want to carve out portions within this supercluster, which is mobility focused. For those of you who are familiar again with supercluster, you'll know that there's several good superclusters being proposed across the country. And I suspect that there'll be really robust MOUs between the 5 superclusters that are eventually funded. Certainly within CUTRIC, our strategy will be, if we are funded under the low carbon smart mobility framework, we'll be signing and seeking to sign memorandum of understanding with, say, the advanced manufacturing supercluster in Ontario, as well as a digital tech or artificial intelligence supercluster that may be coming out of Ontario nationally or Quebec out of Montreal. So whichever superclusters are ultimately funded, we know there is at least one that is going to be playing in the AI space in a meaningful way. In this space where projects touch upon mobility specifically and at a core of the project, then we're looking at an MOU structure where we would aim to co-invest in these projects with another supercluster. The same can be said of pillar number 4. We expect this pillar to grow. These are all the cybersecurity projects that look at the securitization of low carbon and smart mobility systems, including autonomous and connected vehicles, as well as real-time communication for mobility application. So we have quite a few projects in this space. One of them is tied to our electric bus project, given that the bus and the charger communicate through a Wi-Fi, wireless communications protocol, which is open in theory to hacking. So that is one of the projects that is tethered to our electric bus propulsion project. We have several companies coming forward pledging money here. Here we believe cybersecurity right now will go into the stage 1 supercluster bid as one of our smaller pillars, but will probably grow significantly into stage 2 as several of our anchor companies start to identify additional cybersecurity applications. And then pillar number 3 will be this TBD right now because it's definitely the most dynamic. Originally we were looking at lightweight materials and materials manufacturing is potentially the baby of the advanced manufacturing supercluster, and certainly it will be, definitely on the manufacturing side in terms of robotics and advanced assembly for innovations to advanced manufacturing processes. But where CUTRIC supercluster has been asked to stay active is really in the materials application to mobility devices, so vehicular applications. So here we're talking about advanced materials, composites, polymers, advanced metals, and materials for the vehicular design itself. And it's TBD because we have several molding companies that have now come forward identifying the fact that they would like to carve out money within our supercluster, and we have some initial movement in this space in Quebec as well around the aluminum sector. So we're really excited about that because it looks like a really natural MOU scenario with an advanced manufacturing supercluster in the future, where we're doing projects on the materials innovation side for the integration into the vehicle itself, and where perhaps the advanced materials supercluster is focusing more on the assembly floor advancements and innovations. So a very interesting area. I'll be interested myself to see how this pans out. Right now it looks like going into step number 1 or stage 1 of the supercluster, we'll probably have about $20 million, $20 to $30 million carved out by companies in this space. So that takes you through the 5 pillars of innovation that we've developed over the last 3 years, which have solidified over the last 2 months as part of this supercluster initiative based on pledges by companies. Now, for those of you familiar with CUTRIC and what we've been battling at the federal level, in a positive way, is the fragmentation of funding. Currently, we have projects coming through the CUTRIC pipeline in Ontario and Quebec, and some in Alberta and British Columbia as well, that we try to shove through federal programming. And the vast majority of federal programming is not ideally organized or coordinated for low-carbon smart mobility tech. So what's happened is we've gotten projects that have gotten ASIP funding or SDTC funding, and then they come to the CUTRIC fold for additional funding to grow in a particular provincial landscape. And that works, but it's just not the most efficient way to get projects out the door. It definitely takes more time than it should. And none of these programs is designed for transit applications, including PTIF. So PTIF, which is public transit infrastructure funding, both phase 1 and what is probably going to be phase 2, were not designed for innovation projects. They were designed for procurement off-the-shelf commercial products. So your kind of Canadian Tire version of a commercialized product. And yet what we do really is on the integration and innovation side, and the PTIF phase 1 money was not designed to support innovation projects. So we hit a wall even in Infrastructure Canada, which is presumably dedicated to transit applications. And that's not a surprising wall. I mean, at the end of the day, for the last 15 years, we haven't had a federal mandate for low carbon smart mobility tech on the innovation side. So it's not surprising the federal landscape is fragmented, which has resulted in our lobby effort over the last 2 years. And at the top, you'll see there that we put in this year into the federal budget, we requested $185 million over 4 years because we had that many projects coming through that needed federal matching, where it was not a perfect NSERC fit or SDTC or ASIP, or it was a combination of the two, or it would have taken way too long to have gone through one of those portals and then have obtained provincial funding. So to streamline it, we made that ask. Instead of being funded through that ask, instead what came out was an addition of $150 million for transportation innovation in the Supercluster Fund. So that is why we're bidding for that 150. I can tell you right now that based on the bids that we've received so far, and certainly based on the bids that we expect to receive by the end of this week, we will be oversubscribed. So that means more companies coming in asking for more than $150 million as a total matching request. That is a good position to be in. An oversubscribed position is a very solid position to go into stage 1 with. It is able to demonstrate that after a short period of time, we can already demonstrate empirically more industry investment than the $150 million dedicated to transportation innovation. And what that means is that between July and essentially the end of September, we will work with those companies that have invested in phase 1 of the supercluster bid through CUTRIC to determine whether collectively we want to make a pitch and bid for up to $250 million. We are able to bid for up to $250 million as part of the supercluster guidelines led by the CUTRIC Consortium. We have resisted that because going outside the 250 means we are in more direct competition with artificial intelligence and with advanced manufacturing and with what's likely to be a smart cities bid coming out of Vancouver or British Columbia, and possibly a natural gas and bid coming out of Alberta, and potentially also the grid management, smart grid bid coming out of the Maritimes. So once we get out of that 150 zone, we're probably in more direct competition for those larger bids. Right now in the 150 zone, we're in direct competition with the aerospace bid. And that's well known, and we know about each other's bids, and nobody's surprised by any of that. So we at least know where the competition is. Therefore, it's going to be a large strategic discussion this summer, going in oversubscribed into stage 1, whether we start to bid for that 250. And that the decision will be made ultimately by our industry members. So where we are right now in the process, we went through the last few weeks focusing on our industry members, and we currently have over 85 members, and that includes nationally large OEMs, suppliers, startups, as well as over 20 3 universities now, with Concordia joining as the latest university, and a handful of colleges. So we have a really robust national consortium. We focused on those members. What we did in the last 2 weeks was, especially the last week, we reached out to new companies and we asked those companies, do you have an active collaborative project started in this fiscal year that you want a $1-to-$1 match for that fits our pillars of innovation, and or do you have a technology roadmap, and in that roadmap are you identifying that you're going to spend $10 million on automated or autonomous and connected vehicle systems in the next 5 years for which you would like a $1-to-$1 match. So we've approached it in these 2 ways, and certainly number 2 attracted a lot of attention. There's a lot of companies that do have technology roadmaps where that R&D is either earmarked for German operations or American operations or European operations in general or Asian operations, and there's a possibility of being able to dangle $10 million in front of that globally footprinted company that some of that technology roadmap would actually be patriated into Canada, into R&D centers in Canada that already exist within this globalized company. So number 2 has resulted in some really interesting pitches in the last week and some really collaborative efforts to get money into technology road mapping for globalized companies with significant footprints in Canada, including Canadian companies like Bombardier Transportation or New Flyer that are headquartered in Canada with significant R&D footprints outside of Canada. So very exciting to see those bids come in. What we have here in front of you is a slate of the kinds of companies that have come to the table through CUTRIC naturally, which is what we're seeing go into our supercluster. And essentially it means low carbon smart mobility technology is attracting manufacturers, it's attracting energy providers, it's attracting communication and software providers, it's attracting public transportation fleets as test beds, it's attracting automotive suppliers, it's attracting research organizations, and it's attracting a series of other companies that are quite visionary in what they're trying to achieve. Here in the green are CUTRIC members already. So the organizations in green already pay a membership fee into CUTRIC, and we thank them for that. The ones in white are ones that we've integrated already into a project and that we expect to join CUTRIC in very short order because they are actively part of a project. And there we should note that Hydrail Quebec should now be in white as it's joining the supercluster. So all of the companies in white are writing letters of support into the supercluster initiative. And then the companies in yellow are ones that we've reached out to for projects for which we have started technical planning, where we believe that there's a natural fit over the next 12-month period. Now these are not all our companies, this is just a survey to give you a sense. These are the 5 provinces where we work with, and so we're looking at partnering with, integrating with what are existing funding mechanisms at the provincial level combined with existing innovation consortia at the provincial level. So provincially it's just as fragmented as it is federally, in fact more so. The supercluster money helps us coordinate the federal landscape for low carbon, smart, automated, connected, lightweight, cybersecure and data-driven mobility systems, but it doesn't secure a coordination at the provincial level. It helps motivate it. And so we still have more lobby work to do in each province. In Ontario and Quebec, we're definitely well ahead. There's already CUTRIC money in Ontario. There's collaborative CUTRIC Innové money in Quebec. There are MOUs in place with Innové and Techno Montreal and the GIVEI in Quebec that are under operation being developed currently. There's a good understanding with OCE programming. In British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, the landscape is a little bit more nascent. In BC, there's clearly money within the 2 funding programs, but it's not well targeted. So with the current government, we're about to launch a new round of lobby efforts with the newly elected government, the newly ensconced government. In Alberta, we've had great dialogues and great project development, and we're looking to launch a first round of small projects in the province by the end of this year with provincial support, and using that as a basis upon which to build a more robust CUTRIC Alberta office and footprint. And in Manitoba, that's going to take a little bit more time. The province is really quite dedicated to tax cutting and revenue cutting. So as a result, what we're going to be looking at is building up the relationship with the current Manitoba government through Research Manitoba and the Vehicle Technology Center as clear portals for what would be streamlined federal provincial funding in the future, in the hopes that in the next 12 months there is a movement at the provincial level for funding innovation. Now here, just to show you, this is the current org chart. This team is set to grow and double in the next year. Right now we're hiring 2 folks in Quebec, and we'll be hiring an additional junior project development officer in Ontario. So the team's grown quite nicely. We have a western office and an eastern office. In the east, we're located in Toronto and now in Montreal, and in the west it's in Calgary and in Victoria. The current board of directors is what is in front of you, and the reason I put this forward is because this board of directors will become the board of directors for the supercluster. The supercluster, if we are awarded that funding, will add 4 new directors. 3 of them will be from Quebec, 1 from Western Canada. And the reason I put this up as well is that we do have gender parity, so we have 50% women on this board, very important achievement in the transportation landscape. Now with this, I'm going to move into the projects and take you through a little bit of the modeling for the electric bus project, which may be of interest to folks here on the line, just in terms of the kind of modeling work that has to happen in order to get a complex project off the ground. But to give you the high-level introduction here, what you're looking here is at our national distribution of technology themes. So in British Columbia, projects in hydrogen, fuel cell, natural gas, and vehicle electrification. In Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec, you can see where the projects fit. So it's quite clear that at a national level, just empirically and organically, the way that low-carbon smart mobility has developed in this country from an industry perspective over the last 15 years has been in a distributed fashion. It is clear that between Windsor and Quebec there is a corridor of great capacity, but we would be foolish if we ignored what is the clear capacity in British Columbia, in Manitoba, now in Alberta. So this goes against a little bit the idea that a supercluster should be highly regionally focused, as though Silicon Valley is the only model out there for innovation and development. We're arguing that that's clearly not the case in low-carbon smart mobility tech, and largely it's not the case because there just has not been coordinated federal organization nor provincial organization, frankly, in low-carbon smart mobility tech over the last 20 years to have generated something like a Silicon Valley in a certain jurisdiction. And so we have to recognize that there's just more disbursement, and given the size of the economy in this country, we would be remiss if we did not integrate the footprints in British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, because we are dedicated to a philosophical definition of a supercluster as highly regionally oriented. So no doubt what's happening in Ontario and Quebec is leading the way, but these other satellite locations are extremely important. And now if we look at where our companies are located, it's proven out empirically. So these are current CUTRIC members. They currently pay a fee into CUTRIC. They're currently proposing projects in CUTRIC or being funded by CUTRIC. And some of them, like ABB Group, you see is listed in duplicate form because they have R&D centers across the country. And so when you take a look at what it looks like, it's an industry network on day one for the supercluster to benefit from. These are the universities and colleges. So this is just a mapping of the research capacity in low-carbon smart mobility tech. We do have just a couple universities still missing. In Ontario, we've pretty much hoovered up almost all the universities, which is great because there's great capacity there. Really, the only one missing here is McMaster at this point in time, and a couple small ones like Lakeshore that we just haven't had time to get to fully. But bulk-wise across the country, we've been able to integrate the vast majority of the larger universities. In Quebec in particular, working with Innové, they represent McGill and Sherbrooke and Laval, so we brought those universities in via our MOU with Innové. Now this is the national networking map for our members. This is a slice of our membership, and it just shows you what the R&D capacity is nationally right now on day one. So for CUTRIC projects or supercluster projects, this is what we can access on day one. Globally, our companies have reach already, so this again is just a slice of survey of some of the current members that have signed into our supercluster bid, and what we can demonstrate to the federal government is we already have global exploitation reach, and projects that are done in Canada already have the ability to attract R&D dollars from headquarters or footprints outside of Canada. So really we can use the supercluster as a magnet for some R&D investment that may have taken place elsewhere because of a globalized footprint. Now what I'm going to do in the last 10 minutes of the presentation, 10 to 12 minutes, is take you through some of the marquee projects and some of the modeling. We're going into the supercluster bid with a slate of really sexy projects that highlight the best and the greatest that Canada has to offer in low-carbon smart mobility tech. You see 5 listed in front of you. This list has now grown to 9. I'm going to focus on the first one here today just to give you a little bit of background into some of the modeling work we do in CUTRIC in order to get these projects out the door. And that modeling work helps you to understand just why it's so difficult to get some of these large-scale projects out the door. There has to be a lot of modeling work that is done in order to create the political case and then the business case to get the lobby work done to get the funding for the actual demonstration project. And usually people think you go and get the funding, then you do the demo project, and as part of that you do the feasibility study. But in fact what we found for a lot of these projects in low carbon smart mobility tech, they're heavily political, so you actually have to do the feasibility through modeling work as part of your project development and then go seek the funding, and that creates a real time delay in launching projects. It is necessary work, it has to happen, but that is why Consortium is a good structure for this kind of work. A straightforward funding body that receives money from government and then redistributes the money through a call for proposals, let's say, isn't able to do this kind of consortium-based project development work. So consortia really do create the capacity to create knowledge that then allow for the political lobbying that creates the funds for the technology play. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a bit of a convoluted story, but that is the reality of how these projects come about. So I'll take you through the Pan-Canadian Electric Bus Project. This is a project started about 16 months ago where we reached out to transit agencies and manufacturers to figure out what the problem was. If there's no problems, then everybody would have electric buses right now. There's an obvious environmental check next to it. It fits a lot of mandates around GHG reductions. So why aren't all our transit agencies going to electric buses if there's no problems? And we found out, of course, there are loads of challenges, and challenges associated with misunderstanding, lack of information, sales pitches versus actual empirical data. So just loads of issues that have to be resolved. Some of them are highlighted here: the need for high uptime, demand charge problems, precision driver problems, renewable energy slumps during the day that make it hard to identify exactly when it's best to collect and harvest energy off the grid for transit, and then of course recycling fees. So we started off with a project that looked at standardization as the core focal point. And in phase one of our project, we look at standardizing the overhead charger with the bus by virtue of integrating multiple competitive manufacturers. And then we have the integration of energy storage in phase two and the integration of automated charging episodes in phase three. In phase one, these are all the stakeholders that are part of phase one of the trial. This, as I said, is taking 16 months. We used to have 7 transit agencies involved. And just to speak to the politics of it, 4 transit agencies fell off as we went through municipal councils. So municipal councils sometimes don't believe in climate change. Sometimes they do, but they don't believe in spending money on high-cost projects. Sometimes they do believe in spending money, but they don't want to be the first to absorb this technology. Sometimes they believe in climate change, they believe in spending money on it, they want to be the first, but they know they need the support of their local utility, and in Ontario maybe their local utility doesn't want to help them. So the reality is, over the last year there's been just a lot of political and economic challenges in making sure that champions can get to the table to actually launch a project like this. Brampton and York region definitely leading the way in Ontario, with TransLink coming in through Vancouver. The total number of buses here will be 20 electric buses, a split of New Flyer Nova, and 7 overhead chargers with ABB and Siemens across those 3 jurisdictions, with Newmarket Hydro and BC Hydro involved, as well as Electra. And the only reason Electra's logo is not up here is because they didn't invest cash. Newmarket Hydro and BC Hydro have invested cash into this project. In the case of Newmarket, Newmarket's actually owning and operating the overhead charging system, which is a brand new business play for any utility in this country and actually across North America. So it's actually putting York region on the map globally as one of the first places to have a utility own and operate an overhead charger on behalf of a transit agency. It's very cutting edge in that regard, and we're really excited about it because it took a whole heck of a lot of work to get that project off the ground. And that work really related to the overhead charging system standard. So the J3105 overhead charging standard, led by the SAE, is really going to be the North American standard. It's not yet published. It is hotly contested. ABB and Siemens and Novabus and New Flyer are all at the table fighting for the standardization and the publication of that standardization protocol. In the meantime, we've utilized Volvo Group's open op-charge interoperability protocol, which solves about 80% of standardization issues. And on top of op-charge, we've packaged on a series of agreed to standardization protocols between these 4 manufacturers for the purposes of the pilot in Canada. Now, phase 2 will integrate energy storage both at the site of the charger and at the site of the garage, and I'll explain to you why, because I'll show you in the last bit of this presentation some of the modeling that demonstrates the need for energy storage, and then moving into automated charging. With phase 2, these are currently the systems that have identified interest, systems as well as companies. So here are all the utilities that have put up their hand to say they want to co-invest. Here are all the transit agencies that have said they want to absorb these technologies, and now that somebody has been first in phase 1, they're ready to be second. And then, of course, our manufacturers at the table. In phase 2, an interesting development is that BAE is going to be developing a plug-in hybrid electric powertrain that would plug into the standardized overhead charging system in competition with the TM4-led Canadian collaboration with Cummins as a diesel engine maker for an equivalent powertrain that would be a plug-in hybrid system. And so we have a direct competition between BAE and the TM4 Cummins partnership, which is really exciting for transit agencies as well as manufacturers to be able to look at more than one supplier. And if you've been playing in the transit domain, you know that it is governed by monopolies, and the electrification of transit is really breaking up those monopolies. So our project will be launching the goal expected to get to 40 electric and plug-in hybrid electric buses across at least 6 transit jurisdictions, with a likely number of 15 overhead chargers. The energy storage devices will be a combination of battery and potentially flywheel that has yet to be determined through our technical planning sessions. Just to summarize before I show you the modeling on the electric bus one, we also have some other marquee projects going into the Supercluster bid. One is our hydrogen fuel cell demonstration and integration trial. Technical planning for this is starting on Monday in Winnipeg. We are starting off with a major transit play, trying to get to 30 hydrogen fuel cell buses in at least 2 jurisdictions jurisdictions, likely Ontario and Quebec or Ontario, Manitoba, integrating multiple methods for producing hydrogen, and then patching on top of that in the future a Toyota fuel cell vehicle leasing program. That's part of stage 2 of the supercluster. We will not have the Toyota piece into stage 1 of the supercluster. The goal is, if we get invited to stage 2, to work with Toyota to get them integrated into stage 2 for a leasing program. And so far things look positive on that front. Project 3 is a national smart vehicle demo project. Here we went across the country to figure out who's doing what in automated vehicle technology, and we found there are loads of cities trying to do something in autonomous vehicles. Some of them are trying to launch on-road demo pilots, but it's up to a municipal department to try and find the right manufacturers and software providers. In other cases, we have sites that are led by industry, like in Montreal, ABB and FP Innovations, in Ottawa being led by BlackBerry QNX, in Quebec City by Thales. And so in the cases where it's led by a company, of course, there's the self-interest of that company coming to the forefront in terms of owning IP, and that's good for the local economy, but it's not necessarily good for achieving standardization, not only across municipalities, but across Canada and North America. So again, what we did was we called together a lot of these municipalities, a lot of the companies, over 40 companies that we interviewed and then brought together in a first technical planning session in Toronto. The second session's in August at PMG test facilities in Blainville in Quebec, and the third technical planning session will be in Edmonton in the fall. And over the course of 10 technical planning sessions, we will get to a full scoping, budget, and set of common deliverables across. The goal right now across is 5 municipalities. So of the ones you see here in front of you, from Vancouver through to Edmonton and Calgary, as well as it should be actually a star up in Fort McMurray. The star's a little bit far south for Fort McMurray, but nonetheless across Calgary, Edmonton, and Fort McMurray, as well as Winnipeg, Oshawa, Stratford, Ottawa, Quebec City, Montreal. Those are the cities that have reached out to us and that we've reached out to identify what they are doing in AV technology, and we're looking for 5 of those to integrate into a national standardized automated vehicle demonstration trial. And there we would package the whole request into a supercluster funding request. We expect that project would be about $40 million and aiming towards 20 to 25 vehicles across 5 municipal fleet jurisdictions. Here are some of the companies that have already attended our technical planning session, some of the organizations, universities, and companies that are trying to lead the shaping of that project in terms of deliverables. And of course, they're there to shape it in the interest of their own commercial value and profitability, which is exactly why they should be at the table if they're corporations. And the cities are there, of course, in order to be able to put themselves forward as a hub for mobility in the autonomous and connected vehicle domain. In terms of futuristic thinking, we've incorporated into our supercluster bid a Hyperloop competition with Transpod. So this company is coming in at several tens of millions of dollars into our supercluster bid to launch what would be a major infrastructure play for a Hyperloop demonstration in Canada, likely in the Ottawa or in the Ontario-Quebec corridor. And then we've incorporated Hydrail as well, with Hydrogenics being one of the leading companies on that kind of initiative. But of course, we're integrating additional hydrogen-oriented innovators. So now what I'm going to do is I'm not going to spend too much time on our national alliances. Just to let you know, we're building up our national alliances with provincially footprinted organizations to make sure we've brought in all the technical capacities across all the fragmented provinces. And then we do have a First Nations policy where we are looking right now at working with First Nations communities, in particular likely in Thunder Bay and then in British Columbia, in order to be able to offer pilots and demonstrations of safe, secure, low carbon and connected mobility for people, in order to ensure that in particular young people and women have access to safe and secure mobility from First Nations communities into cities and across First Nations communities. And we all know, especially from the news lately, that this is a life and death question. There are serious sexual violence issues, very serious death issues, and very challenging quality of life issues for a lot of our First Nations colleagues in their communities because of a lack of mobility. And what better place to deliver low-carbon smart mobility tech through a federally funded initiative than through First Nations communities that are willing to work with us to achieve their very pressing local needs and requirements. Now, there are next steps associated with our supercluster, and if anybody here on the line is interested in that, you're certainly welcome to reach out to us. But I do want to spend the last couple questions, and there are the contacts if you do want to reach out to us. I want to spend the last couple minutes just showing you some of the modeling, as I promised, around our electric bus project. For every project that we lead, whether it's the smart vehicle project or the hydrogen fuel cell project or the electric bus project or any one of the other projects that involve a complexity of companies, so more than 3 or 4 companies, in particular if they involve involve competitive companies that are hotly contesting the IP and each trying to own their IP in a certain jurisdiction. Then what we always do as part of the project planning process is we try to do as much predictive modeling as possible before we go to a city council and ask for funding, before we go to a province and ask for funding, and definitely before we go to the federation and ask for money. Now, of course, supercluster money will liberate us a little bit to be able to move forward more quickly. But in this particular regard, we didn't have that streamlined funding, so we had to do a lot of this modeling work right off the bat to get the political buy-in. So just to show you, I just took an example of our TransLink modeling. So this is TransLink Route 100, and this will give you a little bit of a sense. We modeled out the routes and duty cycles, the energy consumption, the charging power calculations, etc. And what we're able to show TransLink and the City of Vancouver and BC Hydro and the federal government and the province of British Columbia was really what would it cost and what would it look like to put electric buses on your route according to the best simulation and prediction that we have available to us right now. And this methodology has been refined and iterated multiple times. We worked on it with the National Research Council and my own research team to really put a lot of brains behind this. So in the TransLink case, if you're familiar with TransLink and Route 100, we looked at the specs associated with the route. We looked at the topography of the routes, so, to determine the energy consumption. We looked at modeling the full topography across all the station stops. We looked at a light duty, a medium duty, and a heavy duty cycle. So light duty cycle is your bus comes out of the garage, it does not stop. It does not pick up passengers, it just drives around the route and comes right back. So a baseline for how much energy do you consume to move that hunk of steel around the route. Medium duty cycle is making 50% of stops, carrying 50% of passengers, 50% of auxiliary loads are on. And heavy duty is of course making all station stops, full auxiliary loads are on, making additional stopping for pedestrians, so much more comparable to a real route. Then we took a look at the stats about the duty cycle, of course the speed, the average moving speed, the acceleration, etc. We then took a look at the energy consumption from the utility. So we took a look at a lot of the characteristics associated with the bus itself and with the routes and the assumptions I just explained to you. We took a look at the parameters of the vehicle itself. We had to make some assumptions in here. We took a look at the motor efficiency curves that were provided by our OEM partners. And the real benefit of working with manufacturers in a consortium is they do provide you with a lot of data that you don't get if they are not part of the project. So it allows you to do some fairly accurate modeling. These are just some of the weight estimations. So this is the data that we had to go back and forth to obtain in order to pump it into our model. We pumped it in, and this gives you an example of what a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack on a new Flyer bus would look like if it were applied to Route 100. So you can see here in the light duty, medium duty, heavy duty that we were able to model out kilowatt hour per kilometer, total kilowatt hours used, the state of charge at the end of the route. So in other words, it does a loop, it comes back to the charger, what's the state of charge. This allows transit agencies to realize that if they're using a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack, that they actually have quite a lot of charge left if they do a heavy duty cycle even. So even in the heaviest route, they still come back to the charger with approximately 78% of state of charge available. That allows for two possibilities. One, don't buy a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack. It allows you as a transit agency to look at the market and say, okay, maybe I don't need a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack. Maybe I can drop my request to 76 or 100 or 50 based on the requirements for energy on that route. And that has a clear price point attached to it. The other option is it allows you to create an electrification strategy, and as a transit agency say to yourself, well, maybe we do want this bigger battery pack, but rather than stopping to charge every time it does a loop, maybe it only stops to charge every third loop. So there's a series of possibilities technically that come out of this modeling. We then looked at a Nova bus, a 76 kilowatt hour battery pack, a much smaller battery pack. There are all sorts of reasons why you might want a smaller, lighter, more nimble battery pack. And looking at Route 100, our question was, could it deliver? And on a heavy duty cycle, yes, it can deliver, but it does mean when you come back to the charger, you only have about 50% of your pack left in usable energy. So you necessarily do need to charge, which means you can't use a strategy of run around the route 2 or 3 times between charges, which means you have to look at your route and say, do I have enough time to charge every single time I'll go around the route? And is that a worthy investment in terms of potentially changing my schedule to accommodate that charging time in exchange for what might be in the future a cheaper bus because the battery pack is half the size. The infrastructure, we also want to see what the cost was of all of this. So we took a look at 450 kilowatt hour chargers, or for 450 kilowatt chargers, sorry, and we took a look at how much energy from the grid is being pulled. So here we always focus on heavy duty. There you can see if you have a heavy-duty run on Route 100 with a 200 kilowatt-hour battery pack that you're pulling about 38 kilowatt-hours from the grid, and your charging time is about 4.5 minutes. Now, if you're not running heavy-duty, it's the middle of the day, there's not as many passengers on, or it's not winter and summer, your auxiliaries are not on, so your air conditioning or heating are not on, they're not pulling electricity from the battery pack, then you can get away with a 3-minute charge. Or you can adopt a charging strategy of not fully charging up each time you do a loop. So this is the kind of modeling that allows transit agencies to start thinking technically about options rather than assuming one bus fits everything. And this is opening up a dialogue in transit, because transit has historically thought of one diesel bus to serve any and every kind of possible route scenario. And what's happening with this modeling work is we're allowing transit to start thinking about right-sizing technologies to certain routes, or at least certain kinds of routes. Here we did the same thing, the energy demand on a smaller battery pack, similar scenario in terms of charging side. Then we took a look at the fuel consumption. So of course we took a look at fuel consumption compared to a diesel. We had to take a look at engine efficiency to do that. We made a lot of assumptions and grabbed a lot of the information about the diesel engine from Cummins. We took a look at the parameters for CO2 emissions and GHG emissions. We then modeled out, of course, the duty cycles for GHG emissions, and then we pumped it into a comparative table. So if you're TransLink, you're able to look at this and say, okay, on Route 100, I know that in a heavy-duty cycle, I'm using about 19 liters of diesel. I know my efficiency is about 61 liters per 100 kilometers. I know my on-road CO2 is about 325,000 kilograms. My diesel cost will vary based on market prices, so I know my cost for this diesel bus is going to be between $120,000 and $160,000 for the year. We then compared it to the electricity of estimations, given that we had to look at the schedule, the time of charging during the day, the time of use charges, plus the demand charges. We use BC Hydro's rates. We pumped that into our model with all of their assumptions, their discounts, rate rides, etc. And we pumped out this table, which says if I am TransLink and I have a bus on Route 100 and my bus is charging at 2 chargers, one at each location, I have some basic costs, I have demand costs, I have energy costs calculated out. This bus, this 200 kilowatt hour bus running around Route 100 for the year is going to cost me about $71,000. In comparison, the diesel cost me $140,000 to $160,000. So the benefit of going electric, even with demand charges, is about $69,000 to $90,000. That's a significant savings. Now, take into account the fact that these vehicle systems and chargers are significantly more expensive. You have to now calculate how many years. Well, a diesel bus is about 600,000, an electric bus is about $1 million, so you need to make up 400,000, and the charger is anywhere between 700,000 and $1 million. So over an 18-year life cycle, you pretty much have a wash, or it's slightly in favor of electrification if you assume the price of diesel goes up. But what we identified here was if you look at the demand cost, which is line item number 3, and you compare it to the electricity or energy costs, what you can see here is the energy charge is $25,000 for this heavy-duty bus and $36,000 for the demand charge. So the electricity as a commodity is actually pretty cheap. It's the demand charge because you're pulling power off the grid at 450 kilowatts. And a result of that is what is motivating phase 2 of our technology project, the integration of energy storage to trickle charge and then deliver power at a high level, not from the grid, but from the battery pack or from the energy storage device, to eliminate or mitigate that $36,000 of demand charges, to make it more economical for transit to go electric and eliminate those demand charges over time. Now, of course, over time with the technology integration, we have to demonstrate that the integration of energy storage comes in cheap enough that even when you eliminate that $36,000, you offset the cost of the energy storage device. So these technology projects, this is an example of how you necessarily have to go through this kind of modeling in order to get to a stage of getting buy-in from municipalities. Supercluster funding will solve the problem at the federal level. It won't solve the problem at the municipal level, but a combination of consortium-led project development work like this with streamlined federal provincial money will get these projects out the door a lot more rapidly than currently is the case. So I hope that's not too much information to throw your way. And with that, Rajiv, I'm going to turn it back to you because that takes me to the end of the overview of the modeling, which I just wanted to share with you as one example of one project. Similar modeling work will happen with the Autonomous Vehicle Project, the National Smart Vehicle one, as well as the Hydrogen Fuel Cell one. And with that, I'm open to questions that may be coming from the audience.
Thank you so much, Josipa. A very impressive presentation. Oh my God, the kind of projects and the kind of interesting technology initiatives you are working on, and that's amazing. So thank you so much. I do not have any questions from the audience. Probably they are just wowed with your presentation. I can certainly tell you one thing. Thank you for your support with our electric vehicle program. And if it was not CUTRIC, probably we would have had difficulty even convincing our council about purchasing the electric vehicles, which are certainly costly at this point of time. So there was a very interesting question during our council meeting when we were looking for the approval for the purchase of electric buses is why it is costing so much. Why shouldn't you continue with the diesel buses? And then we had to explain as to in the long run, and based on the modeling which you just showed, is in the long run it's going to be cheaper, and also it makes sense from a low carbon emission perspective. So
in fact, I can add one element to that, Rajiv, because we did go through this dialogue many times, and as you saw in our modeling, we did additionally create a carbon comparison costing analysis, and in that analysis we presented to councils and transit agencies, look, if diesel stays unpriced, so in other words, diesel has a market value, it might vary between $1 to $1.50 a liter, but if the carbon content is unpriced, then after 18 years, you're still going to make back your money, but you're pretty much going to break even on going electric given the current costs of chargers and buses. But if diesel does get priced with carbon, and it currently is priced in Ontario and Quebec and British Columbia and now Alberta, then the differential drops significantly, and we're looking at a payback period of between 10 and 12 years. And when we did our modeling to demonstrate that payback period, we assumed that carbon would be priced at 12 cents, and it was in fact priced at we're assuming it would be priced at $12 a metric ton, and in fact if you were looking at the cap and trade market that was launched in Ontario, it came in at $18.01 per metric ton. So already our carbon pricing analysis that showed a payback period in 10 to 12 years was underestimating the case. And if it's the case that Shell and Petro-Canada and other petroleum providers of diesel pass on the full cost of carbon pricing to the user, and that means that your price of diesel as a transit agency goes up in linear fashion compared to the carbon price that they have to pay as fuel suppliers, then in fact the payback period drops even further because the price of diesel goes up even more quickly. And that was really theoretical, I think, for a lot of municipalities until we were able to show the cost comparison based on the modeling. So I'm not sure how you feel at York Region, but we felt that nationally, whether it was Thunder Bay or Edmonton or Vancouver, that really helped municipal councils understand the economic costs of this stuff in the real near term.
I totally agree with you. Actually, we did not get into those kind of details at our council meeting, but at a high level, when we were able to explain the benefits in the long run, they did approve our report, and certainly you are aware that we are getting 6 electric vehicles, 2 from each manufacturer. So I'm really looking forward to having the electric buses running in York Region very soon.
Very much so. So are we. And I'm not sure if there's anybody who has a question perhaps about the National Smart Vehicle Project, simply because it's ITS Canada. There may be some questions there. If you don't have any questions right now, I certainly welcome any follow-up emails. And if you do represent a company or a research organization that works in the ITS space that links to autonomous and connected vehicles, do let us know if you'd like to be invited to our technical planning sessions.
Sure.
Because our technical planning sessions are open to non-members until the 3rd session. So if you want to get involved in that, you're more than welcome to.
Sure. Actually, I do have a couple of questions, but before I get to the questions, you remember that there was a question from one of ITS Canada members about the low carbon emission, especially in provinces where the electricity is being generated based on the coal power plants. So I don't know whether there was any consideration made for the electricity and the cost and the emission based on the source of electricity itself. It came from Bowen Trither. He is online, but I'm just asking this question on his behalf.
Yeah, it's a really good question because everybody asks it, right? Everybody wants to know the well-to-wheel analysis. What we've done is we've said to transit agencies and municipalities, as well as the federal government, look, it's hard enough to get transit agencies to buy in, so let's not preclude a transit agency or a fleet based on its electricity jurisdiction right now, because it's hard enough technically to get them integrated. So if they put up their hand and they want to get involved, then let's work with them to get them involved and get the vehicles on the road, regardless of how the grid may be composed. Now, the second step is recognizing that the grid may be composed of coal and gas, as in the case of Alberta. So it's not as obviously clean, certainly not as clean as Ontario, Quebec, or British Columbia, or Manitoba, or even the Maritime provinces. In that respect, what we've done is said, we're not saying no to your footprint. So if Calgary Transit and Edmonton Transit want to go electric as they are, there's definitely no obstacle from our end from a technology deployment perspective. But in the modeling work and in the political lobbying, we always make it clear what the full GHG footprint would be based on the grid composition, mostly because we always need provincial co-investment in these projects. And it's really the domain of the province to pass legislation that's going to clean up the grid. And so right now, our stance is let's get the vehicles on the road, show they work, and then lobby government to support the cleaning up of the grid in order to make these vehicles cleaner. So, you know, if you're looking for specific well-to-wheel, I'm happy to share with you our GHG analysis on the routes that we've modeled out. We're in the process right now of modeling out routes in Red Deer and St. Albert. We've already completed route modeling in Vancouver, in Brampton, in York, as I said, in Thunder Bay and Oakville, and we're now completing modeling in a couple Quebec landscapes. So from that modeling, I can certainly share to you the well-to-wheel analysis, and there's no doubt that it's cleaner in grids that are renewably oriented.
Yeah, so whenever ready, if you can share with me, I'll certainly share with my members.
Absolutely. So we'll be happy to share that with you.
Okay, so I have two questions right now from the audience. Mara Bullock, she's asking, there do not seem to be many consultants involved. I think the only one I saw was Stantec. Why do you think that is, and how can consultants participate?
Yeah, Stantec got involved because they're working in this space. They want to know what's happening. But in general, consultants aren't involved because consultants don't put money on the table for technology development. And that's just the frank answer. So in the projects that we do, we're looking for companies to put money on the table in exchange for owning IP or getting a commercialization sale that helps the integration of vehicle systems that creates IP for another player, say a Hydrail company. And consultants are generally there to do work on behalf of, let's say, transit agencies or whoever else may ask them to do that fee for service, but they're not there to put money on the table for a project. So they just don't naturally crop up within the list of stakeholders that we go soliciting for money for projects. However, I suspect, and increasingly we've gotten calls from WSP and Dillon and Stantec and other consultants because the projects we're doing create questions, whether they're at transit agencies or any other fleet, questions that CUTRIC tries to answer through its modeling work. However, my team is limited. I don't have hundreds of employees. I have a team of about 12 growing to 15 in the next 6 months. So we can't answer all questions for all agencies, even though we may have the skill set to do so. We just have a bandwidth limit. And in those scenarios, we do encourage consultants to get involved because the transit agencies or the fleet need answers to those queries. What we have found, though, in particular in the modeling, for example, in the modeling work I just showed you, was that a lot of the consultants don't actually have the methodologies on staff. If they do, they haven't presented their capacity to do this work to transit agencies. If they have presented their capacity, we're not hearing about it. So over the next 12 months, it's really more the duty of consultants to let us know what you are capable of doing so that when we get asked to do modeling work and when we cannot do it because of our bandwidth limitations, we know which consultants to direct transit agencies toward. And in fact, we've already gotten requests from a couple counties where they're trying to do modeling of electric vehicle chargers. We could do it if I had 2 more staff members. I don't have the bandwidth right now to do it, so we'd like to point them in the direction of a consultant that can do it adequately and effectively, and we don't know ourselves which one of all of the competing consultants have that capacity.
No, great.
So I know it's a bit of a small answer.
Yeah, no problem. Actually, just wanted to let you know that Mara does work for WSP. So you mentioned about WSP reaching out to you. So the next question is from Wendy Reuter from CUTA. I'm sure you know her. Are maintenance costs of electricity being considered in the modeling between diesel and electric?
So maintenance costs of electric buses or of maintenance costs of the electricity system?
Electric buses.
Yeah. So in the modeling, yes, when we did the economic comparison, we took a look at what are the costs of electric bus operation and what are the cost of diesel bus operation. And we have a whole separate presentation on the cost comparison. First thing I'll say is that nobody actually knows the full cost of electric bus maintenance because there are not enough buses in operation for enough time to be able to say definitively the average cost of a bus maintenance that has an electric powertrain is X. What we've done is we've looked to the experiences in Winnipeg, and Winnipeg is the best example in Canada and probably North America because they've had buses on the road for several years now as part of their electric bus initiative at Winnipeg Transit. Their costs are quite low, and this actually is analogous to the automotive sector. The reality is that electric propulsion systems do have fewer maintenance requirements than do diesel systems, and the result of that is actually fairly low costs. And what Winnipeg was able to report to us is that yes, their on-staff maintenance costs are quite low in comparison to diesel, but what you have to look at is also the overhead charging system. The pantograph arm is a robotic arm. There's a whole rail system involved there, so we tried to figure out what are the costs there. So far we asked STM in Montreal because they have the Cité Mobilité installation there. If anybody's in downtown Montreal, you'll see the Nova buses that are electric plugging into Siemens overhead chargers. So they have some on-the-ground experience, as does Winnipeg, and in both cases they've reported back to us fairly low, if at all existent, maintenance costs. Very robust technology there. I mean, it's fairly proven rail technology. The only difference is that it's a movable arm. So far we're not seeing significant costs crop up in the actual physical maintenance of the bus, the powertrain itself, or the overhead charger. Where the costs would come in that are comparable is the battery replacement. And diesel engines go through a refurbishment, and we've seen a vast variety of wide-ranging numbers there, from $175,000 up to $400,000 for a diesel refurbishment, depending on the system, the age of the bus, and the complexity. What we've looked at, therefore, for a battery replacement, because New Flyer recommends a replacement, let's say, at 12 years, and Nova Bus is looking at a 7-year replacement cycle, is right now we have to go with the best predictions of price per kilowatt hour, and the best predictions of price per kilowatt hour are between $1,000 and $1,500 per kilowatt hour. So if you have a 76 kilowatt hour battery pack up to a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack, you just have to multiply it out and you get your value for how much it would cost you to replace that battery at current costs. When we took a look at those battery replacement costs using that range of possible price per kilowatt hour, assuming that the market internationally does not grow more rapidly and therefore the price reduces because supply increases, if we make those assumptions, then we can still demonstrate that even when you replace the battery twice in an 18-year life cycle, it's cheaper than a diesel engine refurbishment. Now again, there's a lot of assumptions embedded in there. Nobody's owned an electric bus in Canada fully and operated it for 5 years. Nobody's owned an overhead charging system for 5 years. Nobody has replaced a battery pack in reality. So there's a lot of assumptions going in there. Right now we can see that the maintenance costs are coming in less than diesel, but we know the cost of diesel. We don't know the actual empirical costs of electric mobility. We expect it to be less, and I hope that in 5 years I'm back at the table presenting to you empirical data that demonstrates it's less, but that's where we are right now.
No, great, thank you. And I do not have any other question from the audience at this time, Josipa, but thank you so much. This has been such a great presentation. It was so informative, even from my perspective. I've been involved, I've been to a great extent about the technologies, but some of the things which you are working on, it's very impressive. So thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Just a few things before we close the webinar. I just wanted to remind that the presentation and the recording will be available on ITS Canada website, and a link will be sent to all the people who have registered for the webinar. My contact details are there on the screen, so if you have any follow-up question, if you want to follow up with Josipa, feel free to send me an email and I'll be more than happy to get an answer from Josipa. Also, I would like to thank Janica. She is online, and she is the General Manager of ITS Canada Secretariat, and she has been very helpful in making the arrangements for webinar, making announcements, helping me with the documentation, translations, etc. So thank you, Janica. Excuse me, and I would also like to thank all the attendees. So thank you so much for your time. I hope that it was informative for you. As I mentioned, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to send me an email. And last but not the least, I'm not sure whether you are aware, but ITS World Congress is being held in Montreal from October 29th to November 2nd. This is a great opportunity to see what is happening in the ITS world all across the world. and in different countries. So if you're interested and have a look at the agenda, feel free to register for it. I would highly encourage you to do so because this happens once in a while, and especially in Canada. So this is a great opportunity for you to attend and know about what is going on in the ITS world. So with that, once again, Josipa, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I would like to thank you on behalf of ITS Canada.
And I would like to thank ITS Canada again for the opportunity. It's been very helpful.
Wonderful. And we will be in touch. And with that, I would like to close this webinar. So thank you all once again.
Thank you.